Hello everyone. Today we are going to continue our exploration of Tennyson's Idylls of the King. Today we are looking at really one of the most significant um Idylls of the whole cycle, Guinevere. Here in the previous stories we've been looking up to the lead up to this point, particularly in Lancelot and Elaine we see things starting to break down, and then in the last lecture, we looked at specifically the quest for the Holy Grail, and we started to see that this breakdown is due to a kind of moral rot that's at the very center of Camelot. So in this actual specific story that we have here, this is finally going to come to a head. And like Tennyson has done frequently throughout, he's going to use a framing narrative. That is to say, he's going to start with the main character of the tale, already kind of in medias res, in the middle of things, and then there's going to be what you could see as almost like a flashback to show how it was that the character ended up in this position. So if we look at the very opening stanza of Guinevere, this is what we see. Queen Guinevere had fled the court, and sat there in the holy house at Almesbury, weeping none with her save a little maid, a novice, one low light betwixt them burned, blurred by the creeping mist, for all abroad beneath the moon unseen, albeit at full. The white mist, like a face cloth to the face, clung to the dead earth, and the land was still. Right, so right off the bat, we see that Guinevere has fled the court of Camelot, and she's gone into hiding in a nunnery. We can guess, based on what we know of the story to this point, why this has happened, but we don't have the specifics. We're going to get a bit more of a sense of what those specifics are in the next stanza. For thither had she fled, her cause of flight Sir Mordred, he that like a subtle beast lay couched with his eyes upon the throne, ready to spring, waiting a chance. For this he chilled the popular praises of the king, with silent smiles of slow disparagement, and tampered with the lords of the White Horse, heathen, the brood by Hengist left, and sought to make disruption in the Table Round of Arthur, and to splinter it into feuds, serving his traitorous ends, and all his aims were sharpened by strong hate for Lancelot. So here we see the cause. The cause is Mordred. So he's described as a serpent, but specifically a subtle serpent. So this is a reference to the biblical book of Genesis, where Satan, in the form of the serpent, is described as the most subtle of all beasts. So here we see him in this very kind of devilish way, subtly plotting within the court of Camelot. And we also get a particular image in that last line, the sense that his aims were sharpened by a strong hate for Lancelot, right? So there's a sense that his ambitions, his plans are like a sword that is being sharpened by his very hatred for Lancelot. And we're going to see one, though certainly not the only reason, for this. At lines around 21 to 52, Mordred is trying to catch Guinevere. He's aware of her infidelity. He's trying to catch her in the act. He's peering over a wall at her. Lancelot, not knowing who it is, catches him by the heel and pulls him down. And though Lancelot apologizes out of courtesy for Mordred's noble position, nevertheless, this is simply more fuel for the fire of Mordred's hatred. And we also see, this is probably beginning at about line 55, that Guinevere is beginning to perceive of the danger of Mordred. She specifically refers to his persistent eye, and so she's begging Lancelot to leave before they're caught. But in this discussion, Vivian, who appears earlier in the cycle trying to seduce Merlin, right? She's lurking kind of in the background. She hears this, and she is going to, in many ways, be the catalyst and the instrument for really causing this entire thing to dissolve. So at lines about 102 to 124, we have the conclusion, you could say, of these plots. Mordred and his several of his men catches Lancelot and Guinevere together in Guinevere's bedchamber, right, publicly exposing them as a result. This causes Lancelot to flee the court. He offers to take Guinevere with him, but ultimately Guinevere opts to go to a nunnery. So this is the catalyst for the beginning of the poem, where we see Guinevere cloistered in this place. But we also get this interesting description here as well at the point of parting. So at line 125, or even actually starting a little bit before that, 121. It says, "So Lancelot got her horse," that's Guinevere, "set her thereon, and mounted on his own. And then they rode to the divided way. They kissed and parted weeping, for he passed, love loyal to the least wish of the king, back to his land. But she to Almesbury fled all night long by glimmering waste and wailed, and heard the spirits of the waste and wailed moan as she fled, or thought she heard them moan. And in herself she moaned, too late, too late, till in the cold wind that foreruns the morn, a blot in heaven, the raven, flying high, croaked, and she thought, he spies a field of death. For now the heathen of the northern sea, lured by the crimes and frailties of the court, begin to slay the folk and spoil the land. So we get two kind of interesting images here. We get the images of parting between Lancelot and Guinevere, where Lancelot is still love loyal to the least wish of the queen. And that is the complexity of the text and the complexity of Lancelot's character. Right? There's a sense in which he would be the very antithesis of the right courtly hero. He betrays his lord in some ways, in almost the most fundamental way that he could betray him. On the other hand, he is indeed perfectly loyal to his lady, and we have seen this throughout. And even at the end, he still is. But we are seeing the consequences of this now. So we see this reference at about line 127 or so to the raven. So the raven is one of the symbols of the heathen Saxons from the Norse, right? It's hovering overhead, a harbinger of doom for Arthur's Camelot. In Anglo-Saxon symbolism, the raven is one of the beasts of battle, right? Like the wolf, right? It's a carrion bird, right? It feeds in the flesh of warriors after they've been killed in battle. And so it's a sign. It's a sign of the coming doom that is Guinevere understands is her fault, is at least in part, that has sown this dissension in the court of Camelot, is making them weak. Because remember, Mordred has joined forces with the Saxons to fight Arthur. All right, so we see Guinevere in the monastery at about lines 147 to 163. Guinevere is remaining disguised, right? So people don't know who she is. So she's not seeking communion, right? The highest act of communion in the Christian religion, and nor is she seeking confession, right? So rather than going to a priest and confessing her sins and being absolved by a priest, right, she's not even seeking that. Instead, she's seeking news, and she seeks it from a foolish maid who doesn't know her identity, and who tells her that Mordred has seized the kingdom of Camelot, with the Saxons' help, because Arthur was busy fighting Lancelot. So we get this really hard-hitting moment of realization as to what exactly she has caused, or at least helped cause. And then at lines 166, 177, we get this song. Late, late, so late, and dark the night and chill. Late, late, so late, but we can enter still. Too late, ye cannot enter now. No light had we, for that we do repent. And learning this, the bridegroom will relent. Too late, ye cannot enter now. No light, so late, and dark and chill the night. Oh, let us in that we may find the light. Too late, ye cannot enter now. Have we not heard the bridegroom is so sweet? Oh, let us in, though late, to kiss his feet. No, no, too late, ye cannot enter now. So, this song is a reference to a parable that Christ tells in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 1 to 3. It's known as the parable of the foolish virgins. So there, in this parable, you have a group of virgins who are going in to meet the bridegroom. And some of them have oil in their lamps, and some of them do not. Those who have oil in their lamps go into the bridegroom and into the marriage, which is symbolic of the Christian church being united with Christ. But the foolish virgins do not have oil for the lamps, and although they ask for some from the other virgins, right, they do not get it, and they are left out in the cold, and they never come into the marriage, and they never are united with the bridegroom. So the significance of that parable and the significance of the song related to the parable is the state of mind of Guinevere. We have seen in past stories Guinevere perhaps not be fully appreciative of Arthur. Here she seems to have finally come to see the value of Arthur as a husband, at least. And she's seeing that she is one of the foolish virgins from the parable, metaphorically speaking. That is to say, she's missed her opportunity to spend her, or at least the rest of her life, with the bridegroom, with Arthur, and instead she is reduced to the outer darkness because it's too late. The light has gone out. So that is very much the state of Guinevere in the opening part of this tale. Now, if we move on a bit, so if we go a bit ahead to 268, we see or so that the queen is very much, again, blamed for the state of the kingdom. We get basically a long description of the way things used to be, which was considerably better, and then it ends with this quote at 268, right? So glad were spirits and men before the coming of the sinful queen, right? So there's this sense that the sinful queen has actually destroyed the happiness of all the men in the kingdom. Now, despite the fact that there seems to be some recognition by Guinevere, which is kind of interesting that she seems to see in some way the causation here, nevertheless, there's still this bitterness in her. So that in the next line, it says, "Then spake the queen, and somewhat bitterly. Were they so glad? Ill prophets were they all, spirits and men. Could none of them foresee, not even thy wise father, with his signs and wonders, which has fallen upon the realm?" In other words, she's bitter because she's indicating, if could no one foresee this? In which case, perhaps she's trying to kind of push the blame off on someone else, because there very much is a sense that this is the end of everything. Indeed, if we go ahead a little bit to lines 277 to 296, we see a reference already to Arthur's death. But we haven't noted that his death, like his birth, will be cloaked in mystery. That is to say that just like no one quite knows the circumstances of Arthur's birth, so none will know the circumstances of his death, or at the very least not where he is buried. Moving on from this, we get a very interesting question. So we get the question asked of Guinevere, but this is at about line 324 or so. "But pray you, which had noblest while you moved among them, Lancelot or our lord the king? Indeed, who is noblest?" This is how she answers. "Then the pale queen looked up and answered her, Sir Lancelot, as became a noble knight, was gracious to all ladies. And the same in open battle or the tilting field forbore his own advantage. And the king in open battle or the tilting field forbore his own advantage. And these two were the most nobly mannered men of all. For manners are not idle, but the fruit of a loyal nature and a noble mind." Right? So there's already this sense that she even now is conflicted, right? Who is noblest? Perhaps it could be clear, you would think, in the sense of what Lancelot has done, but it's not clear to Guinevere. And it's not always clear, even throughout the story, exactly how we're supposed to see Lancelot either. And indeed, there is this kind of description of uh, the dragon as Arthur. And we've talked about this before. There's a sense that he's a dragon not because Arthur is representative of chaos. He is actually representative of the opposite, but rather because he subjugates the dragon. He makes the dragon his footstool. But we also get this description of Lancelot as the lion, which is kind of interesting. In biblical imagery, the lion is sometimes used to symbolize the devil. There's in one of the Pauline epistles this description of the devil roaming around like a devouring lion. But then we also get the lion as this symbol of kingship, right? As especially in England, right? The lion is often the symbol of the king. So there's this question as to exactly which one is the greater here. But perhaps the real point and where we can really see what's going on uh, in this particular tale is the arrival of Arthur, the final confrontation. So throughout all of these idylls, we've seen the ignorance of Arthur, the right unbeknownst to him, infidelity at the very heart of his uh, kingdom. But now it is finally coming about that all is revealed to him. And we get a sense as to exactly what he is talking about uh, in terms of when he talks about his kingdom. So this is how he refers to Guinevere when he finally confronts her in the nunnery, and she casts herself on the ground with her face on the floor, even looking up at him at his feet. And he responds in this way: Liest thou here so low, the child of one I honored, happy, dead before thy shame? Well it is that no child is born of thee. The children born of thee are sword and fire, red ruin and the breaking up of laws, the craft of kindred and the godless hosts of heathen swarming o'er the northern sea, whom I, while yet Sir Launcelot, my right arm, the mightiest of my knights, abode with me, have everywhere about this land of Christ in 12 great battles ruining overthrown. And knowest thou now from whence I come? From him, from waging bitter war with him, right? That's Launcelot. And he that did not shun to smite me in worse way, had yet the grace of courtesy in him left. He spared to lift his hand against the king, who made him knight, right? So he wouldn't harm the king. Though many a knight was slain, and many more, and all his kith and kin clave to him, and abode in his own land, and many more where Mordred raised revolt, forgetful of their troth and fealty, clave to Mordred, and a remnant stays with me. But there's a sense that only a small, between those who have gone over to Lancelot and those who have gone over to Mordred and the Saxons, only a small remnant is left with Arthur. And of this remnant will I leave apart true men who love me still, for whom I live to guard thee in the wild hour coming on, lest but a hair of this slow head be harmed. So even now he will protect her bodily safety. Fear not, thou shalt be guarded till my death. Howbeit I know, if ancient prophecies have erred not, that I march to meet my doom. Right, so he's aware that he's going to his last battle. Thou hast not made my life so sweet to me that I, the king, should greatly care to live. For thou hast spoilt the purpose of my life. Bear with me for the last time, while I show, e'en for thy sake, the sin which thou hast sinned. For when the Roman left us, and their law relaxed its hold upon us, and the ways were filled with rapine, here and there a deed of prowess done redressed a random wrong. But I was first of all the king who drew the knighthood errant of this realm, and all the realms together under me, their head in that fair order of my table round, a glorious company, the flower of men, to serve as a model for the mighty world, and to be the fair beginning of a time. So remember, we talked about this in before. The sense of the table round is representative of the world, right? And there's a sense that Arthur's project is about changing the world itself. I made them lay their hands in mine, and swear to reverence the king, as if he were their conscience, and their conscience as their king, to break the heathen and uphold the Christ, to ride abroad redressing human wrongs. This is perhaps the most important line for understanding what it is Arthur's project is. What is Camelot? That they would not only reverence their king as if their king were their own conscience, clearly they did not do, or at least many of them, but also their conscience as their king, right? So remember, way back when we first looked at the very beginning, there's a sense that Arthur is a king of conscience. What kind of a king is he? That's the kind. Well, what kind of a king of conscience is he if those who should have been reverencing their king as their conscience could not reverence their conscience as their king? To speak no slander, no, nor listen to it, to honor his own words as if his gods, to lead sweet lives in purest chastity, to love one maiden only, cleave to her and worship her by years of noble deeds until they won her. For indeed I knew of no more subtle master under heaven than is the maiden passion for a maid. Not only to keep down the base in man, but teach high thought, and amiable words, and courtliness, and the desire of fame and love of truth, and all that makes man. So remember, in the Holy Grail, we had that picture of the various states of man, the highest being the pursuit of these transcendent ideals. That's what Arthur wanted. The tamping down of the base in man, in other words, that the conquering of the dragon, right? Making the dragon his footstool, making the passions and all the chaos of the world his footstool. That's what he was trying to bring about, and that's what ultimately failed as the kingdom comes apart, as every man followed his own passions, or at least many of the knights in the court. And all this throve before I wedded thee, believing, lo, mine helpmate, one to feel my purpose and rejoicing in my joy. Then came thy shameful sin with Launcelot. Then came the sin of Tristram and Isolde. Very similar story. Then others following these, my mightiest knights, and drawing foul and sample from fair names, and also till the loathsome opposite of all my heart had destined did obtain, and all through thee. So again, we get this sense of kind of laying it at the feet of Guinevere. So that this life of mine I guard as God's high gift from scathe and wrong, no greatly care to lose. But rather think how sad it were for Arthur, should he live, to sit once more within his lonely hall, and miss the wonted number of my nights, and miss to hear high talk of noble deeds as in the golden days before thy sin. So there's a sense that he really wants to die rather than sit enthroned in lonely desolation. For which of us who might be left could speak of the pure heart, or seem to glance at thee, and in thy bowers of Camelot, or of us thy shadow still but glide from room to room, and I should evermore be vexed with thee in hanging robe or vacant ornament, or ghostly footfall echoing on the stair. So there's a sense that even if she weren't there, her ghost would haunt the steps of his palaces if he tried to reign further. For not, for think not that though thou wouldst not love thy Lord has wholly lost his love for thee. Right, so he's proclaiming that he still loves her even yet. I am not made of so slight elements. Yet must I leave thee, woman, to thy shame. I hold that man the worst of public foes, who either for his own or children's sake, to save his blood from scandal, lets the wife whom he knows false abide and rule the house. For being through his cowardice allowed her station, taken everywhere for pure, she like a new disease unknown to men, creeps, no precaution used among the crowd, makes wicked lightnings of her eyes, and saps the fealty of our friends, and stirs the pulse with devil's leaps, and poisons half the young. Worst of the worst for that man he that reigns, better the king's waste hearth and aching heart, than thou reseated in thy place of light, the mockery of my people and their bane. So he's basically indicating that it's be worse to allow her still to reign as queen, and saying that those kings who do so, right, knowing their queens are openly unfaithful, and yet allow them still, actually rot out the realm. And that's really, it seems to be the point at this juncture, is this sense of the moral rot from within Camelot, starting within and then spreading outwards. So we see Arthur here very much at his uh, most harsh. But you have to remember that just a little bit earlier on in that same speech, in line 534, we get this reference that under the law, Arthur could have had her burnt to death. And in fact, in the original story, as is presented in Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur, Arthur actually does condemn her to be burnt to death, and she's rescued by Lancelot. So here we see Tennyson softening Arthur's character, perhaps trying to make him a little bit more relatable to the Victorian gentleman, for instance. But we do certainly still see this kind of sense of both mercy in Arthur, but also a kind of right darkness as he's resigning himself to his doom. And indeed, just a little bit further on, at about line 568 or so, we see that he is really resigning himself to going to his fate. So we begin saying, well, actually, just before that, we see that he grasps Guinevere's hand, right? Made her veil her eyes, as to say that he makes her turn her eyes down in a downcast manner. She looked and saw the novice weeping a suppliant, and said to her, uh, ye little maid, am I not forgiven? So this is, or sorry, she's not speaking to Arthur, she's speaking to her maid here, but we get this sense, right, that she's really looking for that kind of final act of forgiveness. Because so that at this point we're seeing Guinevere start to kind of see and perhaps even accept the consequences of what she's done. Just a few lines before that, at 568 to 570, we see exactly what is going to become of Arthur. Right? Arthur says to her, now must I hence, through the thick night I hear the trumpet blow. They summon me, their king, to lead mine host far down to that great battle in the west. I must strike against the man they call my sister's son, no kin of mine, who leagues with lords of the white horse, heathen and knights, traitors, and strike him dead, and meet myself death, or I know not what mysterious doom, and thou remaining here wilt learn the event, for thither shall I never come again, never lie by thy side, see thee no more for a while. So he makes it quite clear, Arthur does, that he's going into the West to meet his prophesied doom. It's been prophesied that he's going to meet his doom at the hands of Mordred and these heathen hosts, and he fully accepts this. And it's also important to note that, right, his face, the face of Arthur as he rides away, is described as that of an angel, right? So there is this sense, and we've seen this throughout, that Arthur is presented in a very kind of angelic presence. And the queen, in response to this, right, seems to resign herself to the fate. We see it of her fate of, and this is around line 628 or so, when she talks about that she's going to be really almost like a byword for faithlessness, right, for all the times to come. And there's this sense of resignation. And this is all what's leading up to this interaction again with her maid, where she takes her hand, right, and says to her, "Yea, little maid, am I not forgiven?" Then glancing up, beheld the holy nuns all around her weeping, and her heart was loosed within her, and she wept with these and said, "Ye know me then, that wicked one, who broke the vast design and purpose of the king. O shut me round with narrowing nunnery walls, meek maidens from the voices crying shame. I must not scorn myself, he loves me still. Let no one dream but that he loves me still. So let me, if you do not shudder at me, nor shun to call me sister, dwell with you, wear black and white, and be a nun like you. Fast with your fasts, not feasting with your feasts. Grieve with your griefs, not grieving at your joys, but not rejoicing. Mingle with your rites, pray and be prayed for. Lie before your shrines. Do each the office of your holy house. Walk your dim cloister and distribute dole to poor sick people, richer in his eyes, who ransomed us and haler to deny. Entreat their loathsome hurts and heal mine own. And so wear out in alms deed and in prayer the sombre close of that voluptuous day which wrought the ruin of my lord the king. So we see that she's attempting here at the end to make reparation for the ruin that she has wrought up to this point. Right? She's going to basically spend her entire life not only praying and doing penance, but also serving and looking after the poor. That is the only way that she can now try and make some sense and meaning of her life. But we still have hanging over this a sense of, is it all too late? So this is the final stanza. She said they took her to themselves, and she still hoping, fearing, is it yet too late? Dwelt with them till in time their abbess died. And she, for her good deeds and her pure life, and for the power of ministration in her, and likewise for the high rank she had borne, was chosen abbess. There an abbess lived for 3 brief years, and there an abbess passed to where beyond these voices there is peace. So an abbess is the head of the nunnery, and there's a sense that she serves so faithfully and so humbly, right, the poor and those of her sisters in the nunnery, that when it comes time to elect a new abbess, the head of their community, she is given this great honor, and that she serves in this function for 3 years before, again, passing to this, as Tennyson puts it, right, beyond these voices, right, where there is peace. So there's a sense that perhaps she only finds peace after death. But it's an interesting portrayal, because what we see here, as we see throughout Tennyson's text, is a real lack of completely irredeemable characters. In many ways, Guinevere is constantly throughout the story presented as the catalyst and the cause of the fall of Arthur's court. And that's said explicitly by many characters. However, here at the end, we seem to get the sense that even for her, right, there isn't this sense that it's too late. And that's perhaps an important thing to keep in mind if we're thinking about also not only how to see Guinevere, but how to see Arthur in relation to Guinevere, insofar as his failure. What kind of a hero, what kind of a king is Arthur, considering how his project fails utterly in the end? But perhaps it might be worth thinking about what Camelot is again, right? If it's this kingdom of ideals that can perhaps even outpace the physical and temporal kingdom of Camelot itself, then maybe the ideals of Camelot can still be reached, even on the other end of the grave.